Laird, and I'm going to teach you how to do a butterfly today. It has silverware for the body, so it's and the little antennas we're going to make out of wire. So I'm going to show you from start to finish. We are going to use today, the tools are going to be a cutter, a running pliers, a burnisher. You need a marker, so a Sharpie. I like the fine point, but you can use a different type if you like. I'm going to have a grousing pliers, and we're going to have a regular needle nose pliers too with a cutting part on it for the wire. I've already picked out a piece of silverware for it. We have an 18 gauge wire, 18 gauge wire. This is tinned copper, so it's not just regular wire. It does look like regular paper clip or whatever, but it is tinned copper. Okay, so I'm going to trace my pattern on. I have a pattern made for the butterfly, so there's 3 separate wings to it, 3 separate pieces. And I'm going to place it on where my tail is at the edge and the top wing is at the top of the edge here. So I cut my piece about 4 inches this way and 3.5 the other way. I have a little bit bigger piece here, so it's a 6-inch piece, but I usually cut it out of a piece like that. So now I'm going to trace this on. And you want to trace each piece separately. And you want to put this over top of your marker when you do the second wing. And then the third one the same way. So it's mainly put on the glass just as it looks. Okay? So now I'm going to cut with the cutter from the tail all the way up to the top. So it's a big curve. And I'm just going to follow my line. Now I'm going to take my running pliers and I'm going to put my mark over top. There's a top and bottom to this. And you heard it crack. So then I'll go to the other side and it snaps right off. So you're going to have one whole piece with that front curve there. Now the only thing I can do is cut my wings apart. You cannot do inside cuts unless you have a saw. So I'm going to cut the bottom wing off here, and then I'm going to score and cut the front wing off. Now I can cut those other pieces. I'm going to use my grousing pliers now for this. So you want to use the top part is flat, right against your score line, and snap it off. Now I've got 3 separate pieces for the wings. And we're going to go over to the grinder and grind now. Okay, the grinder has a honeycomb top. There's water below there as a reservoir. It wicks up on a sponge behind the diamond wheel. As the wheel turns around, it lubricates the wheel and takes all the debris from your glass that you're grinding back down inside here. So I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to shape my wings first. And we're going to grind around the whole edge of your glass. You need to put some pressure on it. Okay, when you're finished grinding, you want to rinse it off in the water next to you and dry it really well, because you want to see what the edge looks like. And sometimes you have to really blow on it to dry it. So you can see that it's sort of like frosted on the edge. All right, and you want that all the way around. Now when I did these, I rounded my wings on the top because they were sort of square when I cut them. So fits together pretty good. So now we're going to go over and we're going to foil. Okay, so if you have one of these foiling machines, that's what I use mainly. But you can, if you don't have a foiling machine, you can do it by hand. Foil comes in a roll like this, and it has a paper backing on the sticky side. This is black backed foil and it's 1/4 inch. So you can see the back side is black, and that's where the sticky part is. So if you want to foil this by hand, I'll show you how to do that. You want to start someplace where you're not going to see the seam of the foil. So I usually start wherever my wings go together to the other piece. So that's the inside part of that wing. And you want to make it even on both sides. So you want to put your piece of glass right in the center of that. When you get so far around, I like to pinch this so that it is attached to both sides and I can touch it there with my finger. I'm going to overlap it just a little bit. Cut it off with the scissors. And then pinch it all the way around with your fingers to overlap the edge and to make it stick to both sides of the glass. When you come to the point, you want to push it in one side with your thumbnail and then the other one over to fold it over each other like. You don't want any of the black you don't want any of the black showing. If you do have one of these machines, you can do your glass on here. Make sure the face of your glass is always to your left. That way everything is consistent. All glass is a different thickness when you buy it. This is a little bit thinner than most. I think I bought this glass at Hobby Lobby because I wanted this color. But anyway, it'll put the right amount on the front on one side and it'll put more or less on the back, depending on the thickness of the glass when you're using this machine. You can also adjust your roller here to go in and out so it adjusts to your glass. And then you have to pinch this around anyway. All right. And you can also do this by hand on here. You don't have to use that roller. Okay, the three pieces are finished. We're going to take a marble and we're going to make the head of the butterfly. And I like to use these smaller ones. They're only about maybe a half an inch, not even. And you want to wrap it all around the edge with foil. Overlap it about 1/4 of an inch. Take your thumb and your forefingers and scrunch it around like that so you're flattening the foil out a little bit. And to burnish this, you don't need to use that tool. You can put it in one of these containers with a bunch of other marbles and just shake it up. And you don't have to do it too long. Comes out all burnished, just like a stone tumbler. And now we're going to burnish the piece. I usually use a table for a leverage. And you really only have to go over it a couple times to see that it's smooth. Then lay it on its face or its back, and you want to come towards you on an angle. So you want to come like this. You have to be on an angle in toward the glass and holding it sort of like up. Don't use it flatly like this, it won't work. And you don't have to go over and over it, just so it gets smooth and it adheres it to the glass. You'll never get all the wrinkles out around the corners. Okay, so we're finished with burnishing. Now we're going to make the antenna for it. So we need the needle nose pliers and the wire. So this is the tinned wire. And I keep it on the roll like this. And I'm going to make a curly Q. Okay, and then I'm going to cut it off to the length you want it, about like so. And you don't have to make them the same. One could be a little bit bigger than the other one. And this is the side view anyway of the butterfly. So now we have the two antennae, the three pieces of glass burnished, and the head of the butterfly, and then we have a silverware body. So we're going to take this over and start soldering. So we have our soldering iron. We have a wet sponge for clean the soldering iron off. We have our solder. We have all our pieces in front of us. And I have flux on the sponges here. So you need flux so the solder just won't stick to any metal. You have to flux it first. So I'm going to flux the handle of the spoon for the body. I'm going to flux the head. You want some on the glass too. So I'm going to wrap my sponge around like that so I know I get it on the glass and the copper. Put my pieces together the way they're supposed to go. I'm going to wipe my hands off with a wet rag. I always have a wet rag with me too, just to clean your fingers off from that flux if you get it on. It also it's good to wear gloves anyway. You're dealing with lead and you're dealing with a chemical here. So I use it all the time. Plus, when you have the wet rag around, you won't get your soldering iron smeared up either. So I'm going to clean my soldering tip just once on the sponge on each side. And then I'm going to attach my wings together. Make sure they fit together good. I'm going to pick some up. So when you go to pick solder up with a soldering iron, this is the most difficult thing for some people. But the trick is to pull this away once you melt it. It wants to fight either there or here, okay? So you can only pick up the width of your iron. You don't want to pick up any more than that because it just won't pick up. And you want to keep it horizontal. That flat part of the iron is a chisel tip, like a screwdriver. So that flat part you want to keep with the plane of your board or your table. So I'm going to melt, and I'm going to pull away, and I'm going to lift up. And you'll have a little ball or a little bead of solder on there. And you're going to take it over to your piece without turning it and set it down. And when you set it down on your piece, you really need to heat up that copper, because then it soaks into the seam like. So now that's attached. And I'm going to solder a bead of solder from back here to the front. I don't want to start there because if I melt that again, it could move my wing. So I'm going to start over here. Set my iron down on the copper, melt a bead of solder so it lifts up from the surface. I go back over it. I don't pull off the edge, because if you pull off the edge, it'll pull your solder off and go down to the table. You can go back over it, melt it again to get it looking nice. Sometimes it gets ripply. Okay, now I'm going to do this again here. Okay, so that's done. Now I'm going to pick up some more, but I'm not going to pick up as much. I'm going to pick up like half as much. And I'm going to do the whole wing, the top. This is enough solder to go down around the outside edge too. So now I don't need any more solder. I'm going to do my outside edge first. Take the flat part of my iron and I'm going to put it against my piece and go all the way around, and it'll melt from the top down onto the edge. You can use the front and back side of the iron. It's the same heat that comes out of top or bottom. Now I'm not going to turn it over. And by the way, you can touch it. It's not real hot. It is a little warm, but if you're wearing gloves, you can move it around. If you don't want to touch it, you can move it around with something else, you know. So, okay, so now we're going to attach the body. So the body goes on the bottom wing. And what I do is I melt right over top of it. I heat up the spoon handle and it attaches right to it. When you're soldering with the silverware gets really hot, so be careful when you touch it. So that's pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to flip it around so you can see this. I'm going to hold the soldering iron straight up and down on the board with the flat side in toward the wings and then the flat side out toward the front. And I'm going to melt a puddle, making sure that it attaches to the spoon part. and the body, and then I'll draw this in toward as I lift the iron out. So now the head is attached, and there's a little bubble here